Professor Kim here, and I've got a game that will challenge your love of apples to apples. It's very similar, but just tell me what to do adds another layer of complexity that I think makes apples to apples yesterday's news. I'm always drawn to games that I can see in the classroom or just with this learning component to it while still having a good time, because I want to play a game that I have fun playing, and I also want my students to play a game in the classroom that I know are meeting learning objectives and outcomes and just really great academic stuff while still having a memorable experience. And Just Tell Me What to Do does that. It could be a fun party game with your friends, but I think it's a great game for the classroom because it asks players to really think persuasively and to argue whether or not the player who is active should take their advice. So let's jump into this game. A player is going to draw 4 advice cards. Look at those, and they're going to be pieces of advice from famous people, from anonymous people, up to the chance to create your own piece of advice if it asks you to come up with that. And another player is going to be the active player. They will draw a dilemma card, play it out, and ask everybody at the table, should I join the military to see the world? Now, players are going to think about, much like in Apples to Apples, who is this person that's asking this question? They have a dilemma. What do I know about that person that me giving advice to them would actually be the card that they pick? Because after players select one card from their hand, everybody at the table will now have 45 seconds to explain their advice. Not just play it down and just say, well, I played a card, that's it, and sit back. No. No sitting back here. You are fully engaged, and you have to persuade the active player with this dilemma to take your advice. Because the first player to get 3 dilemma cards, essentially other players took their advice because they thought it was the best at the table, they're going to win the game. Now, you could play all the way to 3 cards, but you could also just play for a certain number of time. It doesn't have to be up to 3, and then after half an hour, you could just say, who's got the most cards? Or you can just say, counting successes it doesn't really matter. That's sometimes how I play, is just, let's just play to play the game, right? Let's just play to see how well we can think on our feet, how well can I argue a point, and how can I make one piece of my advice actually applicable to the dilemma. So let me look at my cards and see if I have one that might help. Should I join the military to see the world? I have a card that says, be happy, it drives people crazy. I have one that says, name a piece of advice that a pro wrestler might give you. So this is one where I get to essentially make up my own advice, but it's inspired by the card that talks about pro wrestling. Another one says, always remember that you are absolutely unique, just like everyone else. And then the last card says, if you can't dazzle them with brilliance, baffle them with nonsense. So, I'm wondering, maybe the cards I've read so far, I don't know if they really help. Should I join the military to see the world? So maybe I'm going to do the pro wrestling one, and I'm going to make up my own advice. So I've already looked at my cards and I've selected, I think I want to play this one down. Everyone's going to play their card down, face down until they're all done. And then one at a time, they'll be flipped over. So it's not anonymous. Your advice is tied to you because you now have to explain your advice. And the explaining is the key here. That's essential. That's what makes this game elevated from your typical apples to apples. And so I'm going to flip over my advice card and I'm going to say, I'm going to name that piece of advice that a pro wrestler might give you. And so, should I join the military to see the world? And the time would start. My pro wrestling advice would be, you know what? It's all a show anyway, much like pro wrestling, and it's best to just jump into what you can right now. If you're in a situation and this is your world, this is your world. You don't have to see the world. You live in a part of the world right now. So I don't think you need to join the military just to see the world. You're living the world in your fun, exciting, chair bashing kind of way. Now, whether or not I get that piece of advice, I had to really think outside the box. Honestly, that was a stretch. That was really challenging for me. So I'm thinking critical thinking is definitely one of those soft skills that are at play in this game. My ability to communicate that clearly and efficiently and in 45 seconds or less is a huge part of it too. So verbal communication, persuasiveness. You need to think about, how am I trying to persuade someone? What do I know about them that is going to essentially convince them or persuade them that my point, my advice is actually good? Should I use a lot of information or statistics? Do they really like that kind of logical approach? Or maybe I should think about like a story or some sort of emotional tactic that will convince them. Or maybe, because I know that they love pro wrestling, I would name a pro wrestler that would help convince them that my advice comes from someone they respect. Yeah, you can do all sorts of things with these approaches to your persuasive 45-second little speech that you give. There's problem solving at hand, there's card selection, there's thinking outside the box with creativity. I mean, there's just so much to like here. And I see this game working incredibly well with a communications classroom, a classroom that's working on speech and debate, a class that is focused on maybe even just creativity. I mean, this is a very creative game. Every time I play it, I think I've got a handle on it and I read my advice cards, but then I find out what the dilemma is. And my approach to solving the dilemma isn't the same as everyone else. And so what you actually get in this game is a lot of different perspectives. And I love that. I love that other people surprise me with the advice that they offer, and I surprise them with the advice that I offer them. It seems like there's only one way to interpret a card. There's not. There are so many ways to interpret what this advice is giving, and it's general enough that it can usually apply to a lot of different dilemmas. And so I think that challenge is something that Just Tell Me What to Do offers players in a way that some of these other party games don't. The really cool thing about this game is how versatile it is. You could play just flipping it entirely on its head. So that means that a player, who's the active player, will flip over an advice card, and then players will have dilemma cards in their hand, and they will say, based on this advice, that would best solve this dilemma. And you would have to argue if you think that that actually would work with one of your dilemma cards. So you're just reversing that direction. Someone's getting a lot of advice to solve something, or one person has a piece of advice and you have the dilemma that it would fix. So in this example, this is by Jack Handy. Before you criticize someone, you should walk a mile in their shoes. That way, when you criticize them, you're a mile away and you have their shoes. So, I'm going to look at mine. And my cards say, should I go vegan? Should I move to Antarctica? Should I invest in all the hot tech startups in Silicon Valley? Or should I hitchhike across Central America? And I think what I would put down is maybe that last one. Should I hitchhike across Central America? I think thematically it has a lot going on with the idea of walking a mile in someone's shoes and then having their shoes and then criticizing them, which of course is hilarious. But I like this idea of hitchhiking in Central America. I might make it funny and play along with the humor that's in the advice card about hitchhiking, which again, thematically, I find the connection between shoes. You might have found an entirely different connection, and that is the point of this game. I love it. I love the flexibility. I love the versatility of it, and I just think it has such a wonderful opportunity for academic and educational benefits. And anytime I see a game that does that, I love sharing it with you in this Professor Kim Board Games in the Classroom series.